I want to just kind of set us up and get us ready to move into this panel. So I want to invite you to take a moment. So take a moment to ground, to settle yourself, to center yourself into your space. Take a moment to notice your surroundings. Take note of your body and what messages you may be receiving. Take a moment to adjust your space, yourself as needed, to remain engaged and as open as you are able at this time. Trauma-Informed Oregon is a statewide collaborative funded primarily by the Oregon Health Authority, providing training, consultation, resource sharing, and input on policy level work related to trauma-informed practices and principles. In our work, we talk about the difference of trauma-informed care and trauma-specific services, with trauma-informed care being focused on using our knowledge of the impacts of toxic stress, trauma, and adversity to transform organizations and systems. This means we're looking at policies and procedures and practices to determine if they are causing harm, hindering access, or if they're promoting wellness and healing for all. We ask questions like, does this policy hinder or promote trust, and for whom? Both those we serve and the workforce. Trauma-specific services we talk about as being focused on individuals, families, and groups. Practices that help mitigate the impacts of trauma, adversity, and toxic stress, as well as promote post-trauma growth, resiliency, and healing. These include interventions with acronyms and certification, EMDR, TFCBT, as well as the many traditional methods for healing that often are not reimbursed or funded enough to be called evidence-based practice. Some of us call these practice-based evidence interventions. In our work, we say that we believe all service-oriented work needs to be trauma-informed, but not all need to provide trauma-specific service. At the same time, a really important point that is often missed is that we also believe that all trauma-specific service needs to be provided in a trauma-informed way. And we recognize that this has not always been done, nor is being done now, and that it can also cause harm, trauma-specific services. So today, we are focusing on healing, centering resilience and culture in this work. And as you listen to the panelists today, I would like you to listen to what is this relationship between trauma-informed care, system organizational transformational work, and trauma-specific service. I would like you to listen to see how you, in the position you hold and the role in the community, how you can elevate these practices, knowing that for some of us, that means getting out of the way. I'd like you to think about what does it mean to integrate these learnings about resilience into your trauma-informed care practice at the system and organizational stage. So how do we infuse this and integrate this throughout is an interesting thing I'd like you to play with. I'd like you to listen for both uniqueness and similarities. I'd like you to listen for where systems have caused harm, as well as community-led healing or community-grounded and people-grounded healing. An important message is for you to hear is that we are aware that this is not a complete panel. We are also waiting for a third panelist that I hope will be here. But this is not a complete panel. There are many cultures and identities not represented. And I want to specifically acknowledge the increase in racist attacks in the Asian American community right now. We are at Trauma-Informed Oregon committed to continuing to hear, elevate, and learn from a multitude of voices and identities as we go forward. With the support of some CARES Act funding, Trauma-Informed Oregon was able to partner with each of these panelists recently to support work that was culturally relevant, linguistically appropriate, and focus on wellness and healing and resilience. So without further ado, I want to bring in our panelists, which are here with us, and we'll start to engage this conversation. So I have been immensely honored and have appreciated so much working alongside these panelists, and hopefully tried to do that in a trauma-informed way, which we could probably talk about because there was lots of logistics that we all had to manage in doing that. And to the panelists, Stefani, Ruth, I have questions that I have prepared, but if we want to go sideways in the conversation, or if I'm not asking the right question, you can say, Mandy, actually what you need to ask is this. Then I'm going to welcome your expertise and wisdom into this space as we have this conversation. So I'm going to ask you both to briefly introduce yourself and kind of your affiliation as you come into this space. And then I'll ask you to describe the project you did for Trauma Informed Oregon. Ruth, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you, Mandy, and muchas gracias. Good morning, everyone, and actually almost good afternoon. I want to start saying thank you to Trauma Informed Oregon for this invitation and to my co-panelists to be here. It makes this space less nervous, less anxiety provoking. And so I am honored to be here, and I just want, yeah, I already forgot what Mandy asked, as you can see, which is part of who I am. I'm rooted within who I am as a cultural individual. My name is Ruth Suniga. I am a brown woman from Costa Rica, from the land of the Malecos and the Chorotegas, and from a very small rural town that is a place of healing and a place of also where trauma has been part of our legacy. And as I think about who I am and what my role is in this world, I always have to be thinking about the aspects of my culture that make me me, and that aspect is my ancestors, not only my parents, but also the people that saw me growing, and all the people right now as well that have opened this path and opportunities for me to be able to work with my community. I am a licensed psychologist, a training clinical and community psychologist, and I was very honored to be trained in the land of the Athabascans in Alaska and lived there for many years. And through that process, I learned that my call was to serve my community, my people, the Latinx people of Oregon. And since 7-8 years ago, I have been in Pacific University. I'm the director of this program called Sabiduría, Latino Psychology Emphasis, or Latinx Psychology Emphasis, which I will talk a little bit about what that program is. And so I'm a faculty member and an associate professor, and also a clinical supervisor in that position. And I was very excited to read many of the chats and to even see some of my colleagues here. Hi, that's what I will say. And again, I'm very informal in this presentation, so hopefully that's okay with you. That's trauma-informed care. It's trying to get into our natural comfort zone. So thank you, Mandy, and back to you.
Thank you, Ruth. Stefani.
Yes, hi, and good morning. I am Stefani Roche. I know, and I also want to thank Trauma Informed Oregon for this opportunity to do this work and to be here as a panelist as well. And I know that we generally first start off with describing our professional background and things, which is relevant, definitely relevant. But today I want to start off with saying I'm a mother of an adult daughter. That influences my work that I've done, and perspectives that I'm going to talk about and share about as well, around trauma-informed care and what that means, you know, when you have that role of where you're caring for little people or you're caring for family members and you're holding, you know, what's happened, you know, historically and within communities. So those things all salt and pepper what we do, you know, flavor what we do. So I'm a mother, I'm a sister. I consider myself someone who would be sort of in the healing genre, if you will, because I have been a nurse since '91. licensed practical nurse, and I'm also a licensed professional counselor. I'm a therapist and a clinical supervisor over a small team of therapists. And so I've always, throughout my life, always had my hands in some sort of healing work or healing practice. And so, that's who I am. And again, I just really appreciate Trauma Informed Oregon for providing this platform and this venue.
Thank you both. I do want to acknowledge that Jillene Joseph is not with us yet. I also know that technology is a thing, and I think pertinent to the conversation today is when you work in community of community, that sometimes community comes first. And so if Jillene's able to join us today, we'll welcome them in at that space. All right, I was hesitant to say, tell us about your work, because I know both of you and all three of you do an immense amount of work in community. So I thought maybe you could focus a little bit on the work that we were able to partner together on, because I know, again, it's putting boundaries around where work starts and stops, especially when it's culturally responsive, is not something that works very well. So I wonder if you take a few minutes sharing about what you were able to do around, specifically around COVID-19, climate disasters that are happening, battling racial injustice, kind of all the things that are happening now, the work that we were able to partner with. And then I'd love if there's something about that particular project or work you were doing that you want to share, that's something you learned from or were moved by in doing that work. And Stefani, do you mind starting?
Sure. So the work that me and a small team did is something called the Cultured Care Conference. And what that looked like was about 22, I believe, speakers is what we had, who came in and put on this virtual conference that covered all kinds of topics that were specific to Black culture and healing from racialized trauma, and being able to do care within our communities, within our families, and within self. Now, this wasn't therapeutic work. It was, more psychoed, or, to be honest, it was more giving people and providing space for people to connect within community. And we had things like journaling for Black women. Again, this is non-therapeutic, but journaling for Black women. We had things like My Body Don't Bend That Way, which is a yoga practice from a yoga therapist from Washington, D.C. Now, everything was specifically focused on Oregon, but wherever there was a professional that could speak to the needs of Black folks here in Oregon and could share what they have, how they bring these healing practices and that allow us to be resilient and bounce back from some of the things that we've experienced in our lives. I didn't care where they came from. I needed those voices and that experience, and those people who are actually connected, culturally connected with Black folks. And so it looked like a couple of months, over a few months period of time, having these small, just created communities with people connecting. And it wasn't like lecture style. So there wasn't a person at the front of the room being a teacher and talking down to the folks. Everybody connected together, and then that professional was more of a facilitator. People could drop in and be a part of it in the middle of a work day, work week, and pick up jewels, but not just like, again, I'm just receiving, but could be a part of something that's moving, something that's that they are sharing from their experience. Picking up stuff and dropping stuff off. And it was just this really, I don't even have the words for it. It was just really healing, connecting time where people were able to be themselves. They were really able to be themselves. And there are people actually who, one of the takeaways that came out of it is that people are hungry for that connection. And you would think, you know, virtually that's not gonna work, but it was powerful. It actually was. And to see that some people are still connected within those communities. They're still going forward. They're still connected. Both some of the professionals, if you will, if you want to call them that, as well as participants are still connected. So the takeaway again is that we needed that within our communities. We needed that as Black people going through all of these things that are happening with the isolation due to COVID-19, due to what we've been seeing on the political sphere, just all of the really challenging, you know, the traumatic experiences that, you know, what the global things happening, like what happened with George Floyd and all of these things, that every time we would see something, hear something, it was like our own family member that was being harmed or hurt. And we just needed a space to connect, to heal, and to learn something new, some takeaways, some skills, and to leave something there for others we were in community with.
Thank you. I'm noticing that the chat for a while was only going to panelists, so we'll try to repeat some of the thoughts you all are sharing. Now it's going to everybody. So I wanted to say that people are saying you're both fabulous. So I want to give you that feedback. Stefani, I think that was such a takeaway. So I also want people to know, and this is probably a different presentation, but the ask was like, can you do something that promotes Black wellness like today? So like the way that this rolled out was not trauma informed in the sense of having a long time to plan. And so, and that in and of itself, we were able to really shift the way things got done even at Portland State University, learn to do some things a little differently, which is great. But I do think what was so telling that even with that time constraint of how much desire and community that I got to hear you talk about, and I think that spoke to that as well. So Ruth, do you want to share a little bit about the work you've been doing and did with around TIO?
Yeah, sure. So in order to explain a little bit about what we have done, I need to explain a little bit about our program. So we have a program that is called, again, I mentioned before, Sabiduría. This program is within the School of Graduate Psychology at Pacific University, and it focuses on training doctoral level and master level students to provide culturally congruent and linguistic congruent services to the Latinx community. And mostly we focus on our own immigrant communities, and the people that we serve tend to be low acculturated, live in the margins by these systems and being oppressed in different ways. And so we provide services, direct services, but my students, who are just amazing individuals that are really committed to this work, also do a lot of work in the community. And previous to COVID, you see my students in churches, you see them in libraries, you see them in the community, just removing the barriers and opening the path for the community to be able to access healing, and in this case, mental healing, emotional healing. So I want for people to understand that. So to understand that the projects that we did, some of them were existing, and the funds help us with capacity building, improve some of those projects, and other projects were completely new. And most of the projects were delivered by the students, many bicultural, most of them bilingual. And so we develop, and then none of our projects or our activities are done in isolation or are done from an academic perspective. Actually, we have very strong collaboration with community partners and with community-based organizations. And that is what makes, as Stefani was talking about, that aspect of connection and collaboration. It is so important for healing, and it's important to be able for us to do our work. So we work with already existing partners that we have, and the students and some faculty, myself included, have different projects. One of them was something that is called Conversaciones con los Abuelos, or Conversations with Grandparents, where the students will call by phone older adults that have been isolated because of COVID and provide social and emotional support during a time that has been very difficult for them. And the beauty about this Conversaciones con los Abuelos program is because the students are able to provide some kind of emotional support. It's not therapy, it's actually some aspect of connection. But the beauty of it is that the students are also transformed. And that speaks about the aspect of healing that happens intergenerational. The students are being able to give, but they are also able to receive. So Conversaciones con los Abuelos was one of the projects. We also have part of that, we partner with a local community-based organization, Centro Cultural. They have a program specific for Latino older adults. And then we partner with them as well to create this self-care package. We don't like to call them self-care package because that is a very wide way of calling healing. And so we like to call this healing, cultural healing package, or cultural healing kits, where the students together put this package that were very, like, it felt like a little gifts during the holidays, but through all of the different materials that we put there were things to deal with toxic stress and to start conversations about emotional health and mental health. So there were resources about mental health and emotional health, but there were things such as how to make a gratitude jar and why it's important, why gratitude is so important as an aspect of healing. And for the people that have low literacy, we provide stickers and all these different things. And the students have a lot of fun with that project, which is another thing that was very empowering for the students as well, because as they were creating this package in a way that it wasn't a gift, it was an intentional way to have conversations about emotional health, about healing, and also culturally specific aspects to engage in mindfulness practices, for example. But as the students were doing this, we have to be very resourceful with the funds. They were also trying to be intentional about supporting Latinx business owners and local business owners to make sure that even through that small gesture, we are not continuing with the issues of oppression. So those were the two of the projects right there, but they continue. That's the nice thing of working with very motivated students. We also had something that it was like a cultural consultation and linguistic consultation hours, where students and licensed psychologists would come twice a week for the month of December to be available for people in rural Oregon and people across Oregon, just to come and talk about some of the struggles and the difficulties that they may be experiencing with providing culturally informed services with the Latinx culture. And there are a couple of other things that they did as well. We have a rapid response treatment program focused on providing a trauma relief services for people affected by COVID, and the funds allow us for students to get a stipend during this period of time, because previously everything has been like a volunteer basis. And they created also lots of handouts and resources, culturally specific, linguistic specifics in regards to emotional health and toxic stress. For example, nobody was talking about how do you, from a cultural perspective, you as a Latino, as a Latina, as a Latinx, deal with the holidays during a pandemic, where the holidays is so important. So the students were able to create package that we distribute to more than 100 community partners across Oregon to be able to help with the community. And the other thing that we also have to be thinking about at this project contribute is we need more people that are brown, that are Black, that are doing this work, that are from indigenous perspective. So we need more people that are culturally informed. And so the funds allow us for also do little stipends for the students that are going to be like Stefani or myself pretty soon. So very amazing, remarkable work. I think the learning experiences, we have many, and I just want to share a little bit. For example, one of the students say, and I just have here the quote, I enjoy working on this project, and they were talking about the conversaciones con los abuelos, and also the culturally emotional health kits. I enjoy working on this project for having the opportunity to support the elders in my community in a meaningful and cultural way. When delivering package, I have the opportunity to speak with several elders who express sincere gratitude and excitement for these little tokens of appreciation and caring love. Elders were also extremely appreciative of the fact that we delivered this in person, at home, even through social distance, and maintaining the rigorous approaches during the holidays, and offer them a holiday gift, holiday wishes. This is one little way that we are contributing to healing. So, and then they say, something about we could not do it without the collaboration and support from our partners. And so this, I think, summarized how lovely this project was, because it was intergenerational. And think about healing, and we think about contributing to aspects of caring and healing communities, sometimes in a very small way. It doesn't have to be something only, a lot of times we think only from a treatment perspective, and we forget that these little aspects of connection at times may be more healing than just treatment.
Thank you, Ruth. I was thinking, Jillene, welcome. Perfect timing. Like perfect timing. I was just thinking, Ruth, that, I hope people are hearing representation matters, and also the intergenerational and the little pieces. Stefani, do you want to share really briefly before we move? Jillene, we were just sharing the projects people did, kind of with knowing that you do so much, but within the realms of kind of COVID response and trauma-informed organ, kind of the project. But Stefani, do you want to share about the packages you put together? Do you have any?
Yes, sure. I loved being able to put those packages together, and big shout out to, what's their name? we had one of your students, one of the students. Yes, who put that, helped put those packages together. So I'm so grateful for Des's work. They did a great job. So we utilized all of these different resources from Black and BIPOC business owners or business people in our community. Some people, some of the folks contributed like face masks. Some contributed tea, like healthful teas, if you will. Some contributed like granola and different little gifts and things like that were put together that would be meaningful for Black people who would receive these gifts, to encourage people to care for themselves and to take time and just take care of them, this person, this human right here. But we also had things like yoga mats that were provided to some of the participants who took part in My Body Don't Bend That Way, which is a Black specific yoga practice. But these gifts, they were specific for our community, and also help sustain some of our Black and brown and other folks, their small businesses. So I really love that ability.
Thank you. Because I do think when we talk about systems work, we sometimes forget that little things and how we do things make a big difference, right? Jillene, I want to welcome you into this space. And so if you would like to just introduce yourself, and then, spend a couple minutes talking about the project you've been doing. TIO supported some of that, but the project you've been doing around your sacred circle and the groups for a few minutes. And then we're going to move into like bigger questions around how do we do better work.
Yeah, sure. And thanks everyone for your patience. So I've just had one of those mornings that, we sometimes have. So I'm glad to be here. So my name is Jillene Joseph, and I am the Executive Director of the Native Wellness Institute. And We are a national nonprofit. The IRS calls us a nonprofit, and we like to call ourselves a social profit because the work that we do, you know, benefits society and benefits our communities. And we work on several local projects here in Multnomah County and several local projects around the state here. And we exist as an organization because of the lasting impacts of historical and intergenerational trauma. And more importantly, or just as importantly, we exist to provide opportunities for healing, because we know that healing is the answer to trauma. So we often say that we have this great awareness of historical and intergenerational trauma, and we also have this great awareness of historical and intergenerational wisdom. And so we like to focus on both and help our people connect the dots between trauma and behavior, and connect the dots between trauma and healing on behavior. So we were, you know, very happy and honored to, you know, work on this project funded by Trauma Informed Oregon. And, you know, because of COVID, you know, hitting our communities so hard, and lots of death around COVID, like our own organization, you know, we lost one of our elders and mentors to COVID in the summertime. So we had to go, you know, go through our own grief, are still going through it. And we were receiving calls and all of that from tribal people in the urban areas and from around the state as well. And so we decided to take the funding and use it for these virtual gatherings that we called Gathering of Native Americans, which is really a model, a curriculum that was developed in the early 90s. And we use that model specifically focusing on helping our people move through grief and loss because of COVID. And so we had separate gatherings for young people. We had a gathering for women, a gathering for men, and a gathering for the Two-Spirit LGBTQ+ community. So that's what we did.
Thank you, Jillene. I'm going to jump into a question. And again, Jillene, I was inviting that if I ask a question and you're like, no, Mandy, that's not the right question. This is the better question. That I'm welcoming that your wisdom and expertise in the room. I'm reflecting so much about the last gathering we had when there was we talked about mutual aid panel and had Dr. Pender Hughes talk about the need for intergenerational. And I think Jillene and all three of you have mentioned this. And I think that's the key, is like, how do we hold intergenerational understanding of trauma, but also intergenerational wisdom and healing? And I think there's something about that, about who provides it, probably. So my next question kind of speaks to that. So a lot of folks use words like culturally responsive, culturally accountable, culturally sustaining, linguistically appropriate. And I'd love to ask you three to speak to, like, at its core, what does that mean? What does that need to mean? How would you judge and define that something is cultural, and maybe even the words you use, but what does that actually mean, and why is that important as we talk about healing and resiliency in community? I don't want to call, does anybody want to go first? Because I'm happy to, everybody's always so polite. Stefani, do you want to go first?
Sure. Culturally responsive, culturally sustaining, and did I miss anything? And the linguistically, yes. So for me, it really means grounding and centering whatever the work is, whatever the happenings, the events, is centering it on the people who are in need, you know, or and not even necessarily in need, but the centering it on that culture, what that person with that group of people wants and needs. And I think that it's respectful, you know, it makes it genuine, it makes it something that's, you know, accessible to people, and it hits home for what they need. And at the same time, I'm going to, every time I hear those words, I'm just gonna be honest, they're also kind of code, right? And I know that as professionals, we all need to have a common language so that we can either, hold each other accountable or, ask for what we need, ask for what we want. We need this to be culturally responsive. I need to be able to ask that, and like I said, to hold people accountable. This is not culturally responsive, so those things are important. But I think sometimes we say those words and we, pound the fist on the table, like this needs to be culturally responsive. And then we take a bow and pat ourselves on the back like we've just done some work there, because we said it out loud. And so it's important to know those things, to have those things, but to actually to put them into practice and to do them because, speaking, let's say, for Black folks in Oregon, we're needing culturally responsive, and culturally sustainable services. So beyond the words.
Thank you. Ruth, do you want to talk about kind of what at its truest sense and authentic, what that would mean to you, or how you would want that defined or understood and why it's important?
Yeah. So I think when people say, cultural responsive and culturally specific and linguistically specific, a lot of times there is another term as well that people throw, or we throw, especially in psychology, which is culturally adapted. And if we adapt this treatment, that it is white centric into the people of color, BIPOC individuals, or those people that live in the margins, then we're fine. So a lot of times, unfortunately, these concepts are taken as a way to check marks, unfortunately. And so for me, thinking about what this means without understanding and having a work that explain what this means, because that's the aspect of the limitations of words that a lot of times doesn't resonate with us. And especially for many of us where our first language may not be English, it's even harder to sometimes deal with these concepts. But for me, it's thinking about that, like in the aspect of healing or mental health, we have to go beyond the individual and think about community. It is about understanding, similar to what Jillene was saying, that understanding behavior, there is also, we understand trauma and then we understand behaviors and then we understand trauma and we understand healing. So it is understanding for us, for me as a brown Latina woman, is understanding that where there is trauma, there is also fortalezas, strengths. And fortalezas is just not a strength, it's something richer than that. It's understanding that healing comes from the culture, but that means it's like, are we giving a space for that in the different approaches for healing that we use? Are we truly embracing the culture and what culture means for the people that we serve? As a psychologist, it is also thinking about, we talk a lot about culturally humbleness, or we have to be culturally humble, but at the same time we say, and my apologies for those, and no, I'm not gonna apologize, but we say a lot of times we have to be culturally humble, and we are still pressing that the best way of knowing is the Western, white-centric way of knowing, that treatment and modalities are actually, those are the good ones. And instead of knowing that knowing comes from different angles, and that we should have not only a single approach or a single paradigm that a lot of times come from ivory towers, a lot of times come from white spaces, and thinking that we have to think about healing, not only, especially for therapists, that we are the ones that possess that knowledge and that we are the ones that possess that experience. And instead thinking that healing is, as many of us have discussed, is collaborative, it is wisdom, it's intergenerational, and in the same way that we carry the traumas within ourselves, it carries so much power and so much wisdom and resilience. And another thing that I like to say is something that I have changed as I move through life, as I provide service to my community, and they heal me too. And as I provide service and they serve me too, because, you know, this is a collaborative process of healing. One of the things for many years, I was focusing on help-seeking behaviors. And we actually have to help people with help-seek behaviors and to help seek treatment and to getting access to treatment. So we actually have to remove the barriers. And we have forgot the other component, that we have forgot to be appropriate help givers. So instead of thinking about help seeking behaviors, can we think about help giving behaviors? Are we being appropriate and removing those barriers? Are we adapting ourselves, our ways of knowing, our modalities of working with people to assure that we are focused on that help giving behaviors versus expecting the people to come to us? So those are some of the things, and I have so much more to say, but I want to give Jillene some time here because I know she has beautiful things to say, especially.
I'm already sensing that we might need a part 2 and 3. So just saying. Excellent, thank you. Jillene, do you have thoughts around these kind of words around cultural responsivity and what's the authentic part of that for you and why it's so important?
Yeah, thank you. This was great. I'm taking notes too. So, you know, the wording has changed over the years, right? From cultural competency and, you know, all of this kind of stuff. And really, when I think of those terms, being culturally responsive, it's based on a set of values, right, from that culture, that you're operating from those values. And so that's the first thing I think of. And then I also think about I've been on this kick lately, and you know, from the other meeting that we were in the other day, Ruth and Mandy, that, you know, lots of systems out there set up their values of that are based on white supremacy, right? So whether it's the education system, whether it's the public health system, you know, all of these different systems, it's about white people coming in to help poor Black and brown people, right? And so that's a value system. That's based on a value system. And so when we work with our communities, it's based on a cultural value system, right? One that where there's equality, right? We're all coming in there as human beings. Like, we all see each other as a part of the circle. And what white supremacy does is people see themselves outside of the circle, and they're helping all of the poor Black and brown people that are down here. So when I think about being culturally responsive, that's what I think of, is everyone seeing themselves as a part of the circle, and it changes your perspective on things. So the other thing about being culturally responsive is that if you're from outside the culture, it doesn't mean that you have to be one of us to work with us. So you don't have to try to be, you know, an Indigenous person or a Black person or a Latinx person or any other kind of culture that you're working with. You don't have to become us to work with us, right? And we have terminology in our communities about people that try to do that, right? There's a terminology called a wannabe, right? Because people want to be us. And that's based on a value system, right? So it's like, you don't have to become one of us. And sometimes people want to become us so bad. It's like, soon they know more than us, and they're trying to teach us about our culture and how to live by our culture, right? And that just like disrupts everything. So what this is also related to is what I like to call, like, well, actually, I don't call it anything, but because I just now thought of it, but it's the energy. So it's being energy responsive. It's the energy that you're bringing into the space, right? It's that energy that you're exuding. And so for example, back to the racism thing or the white supremacy thing, we may not always have the language to articulate when we experience racism, but we can feel it. And what we're feeling is that energy, right? We can feel the energy of white supremacy. And so when you're trying to be culturally responsive, you may not say anything, but your energy says a lot, right? So people really being aware of your energy and how you're entering a room, the energy that you're filling up in a space. And an example, when all the stuff happened at the Capitol, we responded by offering this free training on self-care. And we were trying to create a safe space for our people to gather, and because lots of people were triggered by that violence, right? And so we were trying to create this free space. And so, we put it out there on social media. And of course, on social media, you can't control who sees it, right? So it kind of like goes everywhere. And many people were responding, and including many people not from our community, right? So many non-Indigenous people were coming, and we welcomed them. They got to come. And many of them were like taking the space in the virtual space that we were creating, right? Not having the awareness of, anything. So including their energy that they were bringing into that kind of space. So awareness of that kind of stuff is really critical as well when we're trying to be culturally responsive. And so like, I can go on and on as well, but I'll stop there.
Well, I'm struggling too, because I'm like, I have like all these things I want to talk about, but I wonder, because that experience, Jillene, that you just provided, as I think an experience Stefani had too in the Cultured Care Conference, and I'm sure Ruth has experience as well. And I'm wondering with this in question of like, if kind of, Stefani, you said it great, like we have these words and we might need them in order to step up contracts and grants and kind of hold people accountable. But if it really means that being culturally responsive isn't like learning about a culture, I mean, that's important too. But like there's something about, Ruth, you said earlier, we also need representation in these healing places and spaces, and the importance to that. So I guess I'd like to hear if, and I don't want to say briefly, but I'm interested in like, is it important to have folks who look like you, experience life like you, and whatever identity that is, be in that position to offer healing or to be in that connection and collaboration? Am I making sense? Like, do we need some affinity-based space and honor the importance of that? Versus that, everyone can do everything. But does that make any sense? Let me know. Just jump in.
Yeah, it definitely does. And yes, definitely. There needs to be a space for affinity circles, affinity groups, whatever you want to call it, but a place where I know that I am not being watched, monitored, researched, studied, and so that you can take all the notes down, and I'm essentially a project, and then package it and then hand it back to me. I know how to heal you. So no, just that I can be in this space and be amongst people who we have this common shared understanding of things that might not even have to use words for. And we just can all exhale, just all exhale, because we know what's happening and what we're going through. So.
Right, thank you. I like that idea that we can all just exhale. Like when you're in those spaces, that feeling. Ruth or Jillene, no need, but is there anything you want to add?
I think that intentionality is very important. Truly observing ourselves, either as BIPOC individuals or any diverse identities or different identities that we may hold, and just truly see, what is the space that I'm taking, what is my intention, because sometimes also the good intentions may silence the people that have been oppressed. But on the other hand, just saying I'm not going to do anything about it because I don't want to be to oppress, it continues feeding into this system that Jillene was saying in regards to the white supremacy system that is going to try to divide us and continue trying to divide us, and actually actually remove sense of power. So I think there is a space, and there should be a space, because I think based on what the conversation that we're having right now, one thing that I keep hearing, and maybe it's just my own bias and my own lenses, but I keep on hearing this aspect of interconnection. And when we think about interconnection and healing being part of that interconnection, intergenerational, that means that interconnecting from people from diverse backgrounds, and also with white allies. But truly, what interconnection means, what that, you know, at times we think that we're doing interconnection, but what we are doing is actually the opposite. So, which is division. So I think that recognizing the space, but also recognizing the intentionality that whatever we are doing in whatever identity we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add, you know, those kind of spaces can be really powerful. You know, we did some work last year with a school district where we used Affinity Spaces, and it just like, it really intensified the work in like a really good way. Like it made it move forward in a faster way by doing the affinity groups. Some of the comments we had, because it was in a school setting, we had teachers of color as one affinity group, and then we had, you know, the white staff and another affinity group, so separately, but then coming together as well. And what some of the staff of color were saying was, you know, that was like one teacher, she said, I've been a teacher for 24 years, and this was the first time ever that I've ever been in space just with other educators of color, like out of 24 years being a teacher. And she just, it was so profound for her. So this was like last spring, we started, just when the pandemic was hitting, that we started working with them. And then already this school year, that then, you know, all these levels got involved, and now they just like hired the first ever, like this equity person in this school district. And then they credit these affinity groups that, and they're still going, like these affinity groups are still going. So they can be super powerful. And I definitely recommend that.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think we need to hear that, because I think sometimes we, you know, they get lost in this, like, but we can't do that, or if we do that, we're not certain, you know, I think there's healing that happens in spaces in which people feel seen and heard with that exhale, that then allows that long-term kind of cultural healing to be happening. But I think sometimes we need to start and support people starting in spaces that feel safe. And I don't know that always shows up in our policies and procedures, where one way, kind of the one way fits all model tends to show up. So I'm hoping that people are hearing that we need to advocate for those multiple pathways, and that cultural responsive isn't just knowledge of, like cultural competence, it's funding, supporting in community, of community, by community, as we move forward. All right, so I'm gonna ask you two more questions. I wanna ask you 10 more, but one question I'd love to get your thoughts on is that the trauma-informed care movement, field, practice, ideas are sometimes criticized for not focusing enough on strengths and resilience and post-trauma growth. That, and I think, Ruth, you and I probably have talked about this, and I've heard you talk about this, you know, the words trauma-informed care and languages other than English they don't make great sense in English. They don't make a lot of sense bilingually, biculturally. So, you know, so we know that words have limits, right? Similar to what Stefani was saying too. So would you agree with this critique that it doesn't focus enough on resilience and wellness and post-trauma growth? And maybe speak to, you know, how you think it shows up, or how you think, you know, do you think it's happening? Or what's this relationship between this kind of trauma-informed care thing and wanting to promote wellness and resiliency? If I was able to say that in a way that makes sense to you. And I'll just open. Anybody want to jump in first to that idea?
I can jump in first.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we try to use the language, you know, being trauma and healing informed. And so we're bringing in that healing piece, or making the healing piece just as important as the trauma piece. And I think, you know, I had a colleague one time, she went to this training, And the training was helping, I actually try not to say the S word anymore, but people that take their own life. I think we use that word so much, like we're like advertising it. So I try not to say that, but she went to a training about people that take their own life. It was this 3-day training, and she said that word, the S word, was probably used like over 1,000 times over the 3 days. And her, as a mental health, as a behavioral health person, left that training like thinking about how she would do it, right? Just because it was just like ingrained over and over in her head. And in comparison, what she liked about some other approaches were that it focused on the healing. Like, yeah, the trauma was there, but the healing was there. So when we do trainings, if we're going to talk about trauma for 2 hours, we're going to talk about healing for 2 hours. And we don't just talk about trauma for a day and a half and then talk about healing for a day and a half. We'll talk about trauma a little bit, and then we'll talk about healing for a little bit. And then we'll go a little bit deeper into trauma, and then we go a little bit deeper into healing. And then we talk about trauma some more, and then we talk about healing some more. So it's this balance, right? And so it's important to have that balance, and also important to like give people the opportunity to talk about the healing and the positivity, because what trauma does, it keeps us in this like chronic negativity, or only focusing on the chaos of it, right? So it's like always providing that flip side.
Thank you. Ruth or Stefani, do you want to?
Yeah, I like what you said, having that balance. And the first thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking about the balance between the trauma-informed care, trauma-informed practice, and resilience, if you will, is the blues. You know, if you're familiar with blues music, B.B. King said, here's this quote, like what blues is like a tonic. I think it is. Don't quote me. It's not exact, but it's blues is like a tonic for whatever ails you, and that when he plays the blues, then he's blue no more. And it's kind of just reminds me that balance. Like I have to. The blues music is for those who don't know. The songs talk about like some really tragic, traumatic things that people have experienced, with relationships or other things that happen in their life. But once he would sing or play the blues, then he was blue no more. And so it's kind of that balance between understanding, learning, talking about the impact of trauma, and in doing so, learning about it. It's almost sort of freeing, if you will. But I do also understand that like you're mentioning, having this word over and over and over, it's sometimes either can take over, have more power than it needs to, or it can also just lose its meaning, if you will. Someone once told me that sometimes just talking about trauma is traumatizing. So again, balance. And then lastly, resilience is it's a funny animal, resilience means, bouncing back to this really healthy place. Well, if you are from a community or from a neighborhood or a group of folks who were struggling or barely hanging on, and then something tragic, traumatic happens, you're bouncing back to struggle, So yeah, there has to be a deeper conversation around it, and both are important. Trauma, discussing it, and resilience, and finding that balance.
Ruth, do you have any thoughts you want to add before?
I have many, but I just want to say something because I want to be mindful of the time, and that maybe some people have questions, is that in addition to what Stefani said in regards to this concept of resiliency, a lot of times in trauma-informed, we think about safe spaces and safe places. That is a luxury that many people don't have. having safe places made, especially when the oppression or when the trauma is ongoing and consistent and prolonged and complex. Safe spaces is maybe not necessary, not possible. So thinking about sanctuary spaces, thinking about that it maybe are places to find refuge in the times of all these stressful situations. So thinking about resilience from that perspective versus thinking about resiliency as all these A, B, C, D stuff that you can do, and then you're gonna be healed from the trauma. And then, yeah, so I'm just gonna leave it there. I may have time later on to share about some of the aspects that we have forgotten in regards to resiliency that are more focused with learning our resiliency history as well. Of, you know, it's not the best word, but learning about that wisdom or that fortalezas history as one potential component. But I'm gonna leave it there for sake of time.
And one of the things I hear, and I think is so important, is that I do think the trauma-informed care movement, you know, needs to evolve, right? It needs to center race equity and the history of the thing. And I think I think the three of us in different ways have talked about the word trauma, what that means to different groups, and that it doesn't fully represent, right, the experiences of communities that experience oppression. And I think balancing the kind of amazing wisdom and healing in community. And I think a lot of that also has to do with like, who's the message, who's having that conversation, right? And who can kind of shepherd that conversation forward differently is important as well. And I want to, for those who are with us, I know we have a couple questions in the Q&A. I'm going to offer the panel another question. If we don't get to your questions, most of the ones I'm seeing are ones I think we could respond to, and the panelists I know would be willing to share some resources as well afterwards if we don't have time to answer out loud. But I want to ask this kind of final question, and this is going to be a classic mumble jumble question. So I'll let you take it where you'd like to. But I'm thinking, you know, as a clinician myself and someone who's done clinical practice and now does a lot more around policy work, and how do we put all of these things at all the different levels, right? From individual to policy to community. I'm going to ask you to think, if you live in a world in the future Oregon where culture is healer, where we really have integrated this understanding that culture and the community and kind of our internal abilities and our connections is the antidote to trauma. I think, Jillene, as you say, like healing is the antidote to trauma. If we're there, what would you see or hear? And then with that, do you have recommendations to this group of people who are listening, over 160 people, of how to kind of support that vision to move forward in any particular way? And it can be a little thing or a big thing that people can advocate for or reflect on. But what might you see or hear differently, and then what might you recommend to move to that vision? And that's a big question. So anyone want to jump in first?
I can jump on first.
Okay.
Well, I would hear laughter. So one of the assessments that I use, like when we work in workplaces, you know, we have a training that we call wellness in the workplace. You know, one of the first things that I listen for is laughter, right? So that's the first thing that popped into my head. I think my thoughts are going all over the place. Well, an example, Mandy, like when you reached out, you know that our community has the answers to heal. And you didn't say, here, take this money and you need to do A, B, and C, right? Like you said, here's an opportunity, here's some funding, you know what's best, like you go out and do it. Like that is huge. And the reason it's huge is because, you know, racism is trauma. Right? Racism is trauma. Like white supremacy is trauma. And so I keep saying that over and over because, you know, one of the blessings of this pandemic is, you know, health disparities are just like, it's wide open to see like how COVID-19 is impacting our communities, right? And so I believe that one of the blessings for non-BIPOC people is to like really address racism, or to really address white supremacy, and like calling it what it is, right? And then the anecdote to that is like the anti-racism and anti-oppression work. So I just want to say that much for right now, because I can go on and on, but I'm trying to hold back.
More things. We'll do more parts. Ruth, do you have some ideas if you could dream for a moment?
I think for me, it will be to see my community and to see BIPOC communities reclaiming healing. Reclaiming healing from an aspect of psychology, mental health can be ours. Why is it that sudden, for many people, it is a luxury. Mental health and healing becomes a luxury, and there are so many barriers to being able to access it. And barriers that are structural, systemic, cultural, and so it is being able from the community to be able to reclaim that space, to say, I deserve this healing as well. And for the system to have, and for the advocates to help us remove the barriers that exist. And Jillene example about the funding, that was just a specific, a little tiny barrier that being able to have that maybe for some is a tiny barrier, for others is a big barrier of having and recognizing that the responses and the healing, the community knows that. Also within the Latinx community in some ways is also understanding the experiences of collective trauma and historical trauma for us. We may not be talking about it because we were silent about it, and we don't even know our story because that was the part of the oppression. And so unfortunately, there has to be some pain process in that healing process as we understand our collective trauma and our historical trauma and how they are rooted within internalized oppression and racism. And at the same time, without forgetting all these powerful intergenerational and internal and collective wisdom that we also bring. So it is just in a way to be thinking about this trauma-informed care in a way that it is holistic and truly rooted within culture.
Thank you. And maybe thinking about how we can transform our systems and policies and fundings to support those intergenerational kind of the work that needs to happen that maybe isn't always kind of seen. Stefani, do you have some thoughts around?
Two things come to mind. One thing, it might not be seen because I know that part of my own culture, different cultures that are communities I'm a part of, we're very used to having people come in and see what we're doing. It can be hairstyles, it could be clothing styles, it could be music, researching it, taking it, gentrifying it, and then coming back and saying, here, I have your healing for you, it's $10.95, and so the healing lives in your pocket, or in your, not you, but lives in somebody else's pocket, or somebody else's books, or somebody else's clinic, or whatnot. So some of the healing that needs to take place, it just needs to be, thank you for mentioning that, Jillene, before, that it needs to be the continued funding of what's working in that community, and just allowing those things to happen, and allowing people to, be empowered to do what needs to be done for their own healing, versus 10 data points I can check off and put in my book. So that's number one. So it might not be seen, hopefully, by the dominant culture at all, but it would be nice to be funded. So that funding comes to help people who've been marginalized.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I was thinking, you know, there's so many ways, like how, again, how we do it makes such a difference, right? Like, you don't need to put your logo on it, and you don't need to, and we have to rethink what outcomes mean, right? And we have to, like, all of that is part of the work. And Stefani knows we have to think about how we write contracts differently so that lived experience of voice can be elevated and doesn't have to have certificates of insurance. Like, there are a lot of things that we get to do differently or can do and advocate for differently to support and promote this work to happen in the way that it needs to happen, which is hopefully kind of what I'm hearing. We're gonna start to wrap up. There are a couple of questions in here. In fact, you just spoke to one. You all just spoke to one around cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation, and I think you've spoken to that. But we also can follow up with some resources around that. I want to. Charlie's going to close this out in just a minute, but there's one question I do want to pose to you, because I think, and Ruth and I do some work around climate disaster work at the International Transformational Resiliency Coalition around kind of like community, like how do we bring all community into the work in the different ways? And so this question says, how do you, for people not in the mental health field, how can we focus on healing when not necessarily equipped with tools for healing care? So do you have like ideas around that?
I do. So, you know, we're as individuals, regardless of how we identify or whatever, like we're powerful as human beings, right? We're powerful. And even part of our healing is like embracing that. And healing looks different for everyone. Everyone isn't going to go the behavioral health mode to heal, right? And so when we understand, you know, healing in the English language, heal, the word heal is a Hebrew derived word that means to become whole. That's what healing means, right? To become whole. And from our perspective, an Indigenous perspective, we know that to become whole, it means becoming whole physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, right? So that means that we all heal in different ways, and what works for you may not work for you. What works for you may not work for you, right? Different genders may heal in different ways, different age groups to heal in different ways, you know, different lived experiences heal in different ways. And so realizing that we have the ability to heal ourselves. We have the ability to heal ourselves, and we may seek behavioral health support, or we may not. We may seek, you know, a different kind of support, or we may not. So just realizing how powerful we are and that we have the ability to heal ourselves.
Right. Thank you. I'm conscious of the time. I know Ruth and Stefani, I know will probably agree with a lot of that. I'm going to turn over to Charlie, but I do, and first I want to, Charlie will do this also, but I want to express my deep appreciation for you all, and for the work that you do in community. And because I think I've actually even struggled with the word workforce. I was presenting in front of the Oregon Legislative Committee around, like, what do we need is, I'm not sure it's necessarily more professional workforce, but like, how do we support people knowing how to support people, and humans supporting humans, and neighbors within community in the way that I think kind of that herd immunity to resilience is something to be thinking about, because I don't think it's always professionalization, or at least we need to think about that maybe differently if we're going to get to where we need to get to. So I'm going to do some COVID care switching with Charlie here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming again. We really appreciate it, especially the panelists. I want to take the time to ask everyone on the webinar if you have any takeaways or gems that you want to just drop into the chat box. Anything that resonated with you or stood out, just drop them in the chat box. And that way everyone can see and kind of share in that moment. Thank you to the ASL interpreter. We appreciate you very much. And let us know if you like this format, if you like having these discussions in panel and having the recording. And if you do, like, let us know what topics you're interested in. We really want to hear from the community as far as what we should be elevating and highlighting, and really making sure that we are in tune with what the community wants in that way. So please, if you want to drop it in the chat box, or email us at info@traumainformedoregon.org. That will be great as well, and we will follow up with you that way. So just let us know if there was anything that was missing or any gaps that you feel that Trauma Informed Oregon can adhere to. So thank you again for coming. We really appreciate you all, and just continue to drop in the chat box things that you want to take with you beyond this space. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. We'll keep the thing open a little bit to capture your chats because we'll be able to send these out with the recording with some of the information from the chats. Jillene, Ruth, Stefani, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I might send you some questions that came up in the chat specifically for each of you.
Thank you, Mandy.
Bye.